The awakening in the quiet city of Lahore, where the call to prayer echoed through narrow streets and the scent of jasmine filled the night air, lived a young man named Hamza. He was 27 years old, educated, ambitious, and yet deeply restless inside. Life had given him comfort but not peace. Though he prayed occasionally and respected his faith, he often felt an emptiness that he could not name. He was successful at work, surrounded by friends, and admired for his intelligence, but when he returned home at night, silence would overwhelm him. He wondered why his heart felt so heavy when everything around him seemed right. One evening, as Hamza sat on his rooftop under the dim glow of the moon, his grandmother, a gentle and wise woman, joined him. Her wrinkled face carried years of faith and patience. She held a small Qur'an in her hand, the same one she had recited from since her youth. Without saying much, she opened it and began to recite softly. The words flowed from her lips like a calm river, bringing a strange stillness to the air. Hamza listened, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir in his heart. After she finished, she looked at him and said, "My son, your heart searches for something that the world cannot give you. When the soul is hungry, no food can satisfy it except the remembrance of Allah. If you wish to find peace, start with Surah Al-Baqarah. It is not just a chapter, it is a protection, a cure and a light." Hamza nodded respectfully, though he did not fully understand. That night, long after his grandmother had gone to sleep, he picked up his own Qur'an. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the pages until his eyes rested on the opening verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. The chapter was long, and he wondered if he could ever finish it, but something inside urged him to begin. As he started reciting the first few verses, a deep calm washed over him. The rhythmic words seemed to echo inside his chest. He did not realize it then, but this moment marked the beginning of a transformation that would change his life forever. In the following days, Hamza continued his recitation each night. He read slowly, trying to understand every word. The more he read, the more he felt that the Qur'an was speaking directly to him. One verse in particular touched his heart deeply. "This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those conscious of Allah." It was as if the verse reminded him that certainty and peace could only be found through faith. He began to see that his emptiness was not a curse, but a call from his soul to return to its Creator. One Friday after Jummah prayer, Hamza met an old friend, Yusuf, at the mosque. Yusuf had once been lost in worldly pleasures, but had recently become deeply religious. His face now carried a serenity that Hamza envied. They talked for a while, and Hamza confessed his struggles. Yusuf listened quietly and then said, "You are blessed that you are being pulled toward Allah. Most people never feel that call until it is too late. If you want to protect your home and your heart, make Surah Al-Baqarah a part of your life. Recite it often. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that the house in which Surah Al-Baqarah is recited will not be entered by Shaytaan." The words struck Hamza like a revelation. That evening, he went home determined to make the recitation a daily habit. He turned off his phone, dimmed the lights, and began. The sound of his own voice filled the room as he recited with sincerity. Slowly, the walls of his house seemed to absorb the peaceful energy of the verses. Each ayah felt like a shield forming around him. For the first time, he slept peacefully that night without the nightmares that had been haunting him for months. Days turned into weeks. Hamza began to notice changes in himself. His temper softened, his prayers became more consistent, and he found himself smiling more often. Even his colleagues noticed the calmness in his behavior. One day, when his boss shouted at him unjustly, instead of reacting in anger as he usually would, Hamza remained silent and responded with patience. That evening, as he recited Surah Al-Baqarah, he realized that the Qur'an was not just something to be read, but something to be lived. However, not everything around him welcomed this change. His friends, who once enjoyed late-night parties and careless laughter with him, began to drift away. They teased him for being too religious. Hamza felt lonely at times, but every time he recited the verses, that loneliness melted into peace. It was as though the words themselves embraced him, reminding him that Allah's company was enough. One night, as a storm raged outside, Hamza sat in his living room, reading the last few verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. The wind howled through the streets, and thunder roared in the distance. Yet inside his home there was stillness. When he finished the chapter, his eyes filled with tears. The final verses spoke of Allah's mercy, His forgiveness, and the believer's reliance on Him. He closed the Qur'an gently and whispered, "O Allah, I am weak, but You are strong. Guide me and keep my heart firm." At that moment, something remarkable happened. The lights flickered and went out, but Hamza felt no fear. Instead, he felt a deep warmth surrounding him, as if his home was filled with unseen protection. He remembered what Yusuf had said, and his grandmother before him, that reciting Surah Al-Baqarah drives away all forms of evil. He realized he had witnessed its truth. From that night on, he never doubted the power of this chapter again. The next morning, Hamza visited his grandmother and told her everything. Her eyes shone with joy. "Now you understand," she said softly. "Surah Al-Baqarah is not just words. It is a shield, a light, a cure. It brings angels to your home and drives away darkness. If only people knew its worth, they would never neglect it." Hamza asked her to teach him more. Over the next few weeks, she shared stories of people who had experienced miracles through the recitation of Surah Al-Baqarah. One story was about a man whose business was failing until he began reciting it daily, and soon blessings poured into his life. Another was about a woman who had suffered from constant fear and nightmares until the chapter brought her peace. Each story deepened Hamza's faith and made him more determined to hold on to this divine gift. As his connection with the Qur'an grew, so did his understanding of life. He realized that every difficulty carried a lesson, every delay had wisdom, and every test was an opportunity to draw closer to Allah. He began to view his job, his relationships, and his challenges as part of a bigger picture guided by divine purpose. He started volunteering at the mosque, helping children learn how to recite Qur'an, and encouraging others to discover the hidden power of Surah Al-Baqarah. Yet, as he continued his spiritual journey, Hamza began to sense that his faith was about to be tested. Life was peaceful, almost too peaceful, and deep inside, he wondered if his newfound tranquility would withstand the trials that were destined to come. He did not know that soon an event would shake his world and reveal to him a side of Surah Al-Baqarah that he had never imagined. One evening, while returning home from work, Hamza received a call that made his heart sink. His grandmother had fallen ill and was in the hospital. He rushed there immediately. Seeing her lying weak but calm, holding her Qur'an as always, brought tears to his eyes. She smiled faintly and said, "Do not be sad, my son. Everything belongs to Allah, and to Him we return. Keep your connection with the Qur'an strong. It will protect you when I am gone." Hamza held her hand tightly, reciting the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah softly beside her. Her breathing slowed, and a peaceful smile appeared on her face. Moments later, she returned to her Lord. Hamza's heart broke, but amidst his grief, he felt something extraordinary. The room was filled with peace, as though her soul had left surrounded by light. He understood then that the power of Surah Al-Baqarah was not only to protect the living, but also to comfort the departing. In the days that followed, Hamza continued to recite the surah every night, just as his grandmother had taught him. Her words echoed in his heart like a guiding light. He made a promise to dedicate his life to spreading the message of the Qur'an and helping others find the same peace he had discovered. Little did he know that his journey was only beginning, and that the hidden power of Surah Al-Baqarah would soon reveal itself in ways beyond his imagination. That night, as Hamza stood by his window watching the stars, he felt a whisper in his heart, a call to go deeper into understanding. He knew that Surah Al-Baqarah held secrets not just of protection, but of transformation, guidance, and divine connection. And with that realization, his next chapter began. The test of faith weeks passed after Hamza's grandmother's passing, yet her presence still lingered in every corner of his home. Her Qur'an lay on the small wooden stand near the window, open to Surah Al-Baqarah, as if inviting him to continue the legacy she had left behind. Every night Hamza recited from it, his voice steady, his heart full of longing. Though grief had carved a deep space in his soul, the words of the Qur'an became the bridge that connected him to peace again. He felt her prayers live on through every verse he read. One evening, after completing his recitation, Hamza sat in silence. A thought began to grow inside him. His grandmother had told him that the Qur'an was not only for reading, but for living. He realized that true faith was proven not in comfort, but in tests. He had found peace, yes, but had he truly been tested? His heart trembled with both fear and anticipation, as if he sensed that Allah was preparing him for something greater. The next morning, as Hamza left for work, the air felt heavy and strange. The sky was covered in grey clouds, and the city seemed quieter than usual. When he reached his office, his manager called him into the meeting room. The look on his manager's face told him something was wrong. Without much explanation, Hamza was informed that due to company restructuring, his position had been terminated. He would receive a small severance package, but his time there was over. For a few moments, he stood frozen. His thoughts raced as he tried to comprehend the sudden blow. It felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. He had worked hard, given his best, and yet it all ended in a single sentence. As he walked out of the building, a deep silence surrounded him. The streets were noisy, but inside him there was nothing but quiet confusion. When he reached home, he fell to his knees and whispered, "O Allah, I do not understand this, but I trust you." That night, he opened the Qur'an and began to recite Surah Al-Baqarah again. The verses felt different now. They were not just words, but lifelines. When he reached the verse, "And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient," his eyes filled with tears. It was as if Allah himself was speaking to him, assuring him that this loss was not a punishment but a test. In that moment he felt a strange peace returning. He understood that faith is not proven when everything is easy, but when the world seems to collapse and you still hold firm to hope. In the following weeks, Hamza searched for work but found none. The bills began to pile up, and the savings he had were slowly running out. His friends offered him help, but his pride stopped him from taking it. He remembered what his grandmother used to say, "When you turn to people, they may or may not respond, but when you turn to Allah, He always listens." So instead of complaining, Hamza turned to prayer. He spent long hours in sujood, whispering his worries to the one who never turns away. And each time, the peace he felt after prayer grew stronger than before. One afternoon, while walking home from the masjid, Hamza noticed a small group of people gathered near the marketplace. Curious, he walked closer and saw that they were feeding the poor. Among them was Yusuf, his old friend. Yusuf smiled warmly and called out to him, "Brother Hamza, come join us. We're distributing food to those in need." Without hesitation, Hamza joined in. For the next few hours, he handed out meals, water, and clothes. As he did, he felt something awaken inside him. Though he had lost his job, he felt richer in purpose than ever before. That evening, he told Yusuf, "I came here thinking I had nothing left, but today I realized that giving for the sake of Allah brings a joy no money can buy." Yusuf nodded and replied, "That is the power of faith, my brother. The one who trusts Allah never truly loses." Surah Al-Baqarah reminds us again and again that Allah's mercy is near to the righteous. Inspired by that, Hamza decided to dedicate more of his time to helping others. He began volunteering regularly, teaching young children Qur'an in the evenings and helping the elderly in his neighborhood. Slowly, people began to notice his sincerity. Though he had little, his heart overflowed with gratitude. The more he gave, the more content he became. But life's tests were not yet over. One night, while returning home from the mosque, Hamza's phone rang. It was his younger sister crying uncontrollably. Their father, who lived in another city, had fallen seriously ill. Without a second thought, Hamza packed a small bag and took the first bus to visit him. The journey was long and filled with worry. He recited verses from Surah Al-Baqarah the entire way, seeking strength and guidance. When he reached the hospital, his father lay weak and pale. The doctors spoke of complications, and Hamza could see that time was running short. He sat beside his father, holding his hand, and began to recite Surah Al-Baqarah aloud. The rhythmic sound filled the room, calming his father's breathing. Even the nurses paused, sensing something peaceful in the air. For hours Hamza recited, until his father opened his eyes and whispered, "Keep reciting, my son. These words bring peace to the soul." Those were his last words before he returned to his Creator. Hamza's heart broke once again. In 1 year, he had lost both his grandmother and his father. He felt his strength slipping, but each night he returned to the Qur'an. When the pain became too heavy, he read the verses that reminded him that life and death are both part of Allah's plan. Slowly his grief turned into surrender. He realized that faith does not remove pain, but it gives it meaning. It teaches you to find light even in the darkest night. Months later, one evening after Maghrib prayer, Hamza sat on his rooftop as he used to with his grandmother. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and the cool breeze brushed his face. He reflected on everything that had happened, the losses, the struggles, the moments of despair, and he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Every hardship had brought him closer to Allah. Every tear had washed away a layer of pride and attachment. He whispered softly, "Ya Allah, you took from me what I thought I needed, but you gave me what my soul truly longed for, your closeness." That night, as he slept, he had a dream. In it, he stood in a vast field surrounded by golden light. His grandmother and father were there, smiling peacefully. Behind them, an endless horizon glowed with warmth and serenity. A gentle voice said, "The one who holds on to Surah Al-Baqarah will never be left in darkness." When Hamza woke up, his eyes were wet with tears, but his heart was filled with strength. He knew it was a message, a reassurance that he was on the right path. From that day onward, he made it his mission to share the blessings of Surah Al-Baqarah with others. He began organizing small gatherings at the mosque where people would come to recite together, discuss its meanings, and reflect on how to live by its teachings. The gatherings grew each week. People who had been struggling with fear, depression, and even family issues began to feel peace and clarity after joining. Hamza saw the transformation in their faces, and it reminded him of his own journey. The light of the surah was spreading, and he felt honored to be its messenger. Still, deep inside, Hamza sensed that his purpose was not yet complete. He had seen the healing power of Surah Al-Baqarah in his own life, but he believed that its true secret was something deeper, something the world had yet to understand. One evening, after everyone had left the mosque, he sat alone with the Qur'an before him and made a silent dua. "O Allah, show me the hidden wisdom of these verses. Let me understand the truth you placed within them." Little did he know, his prayer was about to be answered in ways that would shake his very soul. For within the words of Surah Al-Baqarah lay a power that not only guided hearts, but could change the course of destinies. The next chapter of Hamza's journey was about to unveil that hidden power, the hidden signs. The soft glow of dawn entered Hamza's room as the call to Fajr echoed across the city. The voice of the muezzin filled the air with calm assurance, reminding every heart that another day had begun by the mercy of Allah. Hamza rose from his bed, performed ablution, and stood in prayer. His heart felt lighter with each word he recited. When he finished, he sat quietly for a while, reflecting on his journey. He had faced loss, pain, and loneliness, yet through it all the Qur'an had never left him. Surah Al-Baqarah had become his constant companion, his source of peace and strength. That morning, after prayer, Hamza felt an unusual urge to read the surah once again, not just with his eyes or tongue, but with his heart. As he began to recite, his attention was drawn to verses he had read many times before, but never truly pondered upon. "And when my servants ask you concerning me, indeed I am near. I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me." The words struck him deeply. He felt as though Allah himself was speaking directly to him, reminding him that every whisper, every tear, and every silent dua had been heard. Later that day, while at the mosque, Hamza noticed an elderly man sitting in a corner. His clothes were worn, his face pale, and his eyes filled with sorrow. Something in his expression caught Hamza's heart. He approached him and greeted him with peace. The old man smiled faintly and replied with warmth. They began to talk, and Hamza learned that the man's name was Karim. He had lost his family in a fire years ago and now lived alone, struggling to make ends meet. Yet despite his hardships, Karim spoke with gratitude. "Allah took what he willed and left what he willed," he said calmly. "And even in loss, I found him closer than before." Hamza felt humbled. Here was a man who had lost everything, yet spoke with unwavering faith. He offered to help Karim and invited him to join their weekly Qur'an gatherings. Over the next few weeks, Karim became a regular attendee, his voice trembling yet filled with devotion as he recited verses. The more Hamza listened to him, the more he felt that Allah had sent this man to teach him something about true patience and trust. One evening, after the gathering ended, Karim pulled Hamza aside and said, "My son, when you recite Surah Al-Baqarah, remember that it is not only protection from evil, but also a key to hidden wisdom. Every verse holds a lesson, every story a reflection of your own life. The stories of the prophets within it are not just history. They are mirrors for our souls." Hamza nodded thoughtfully, his heart stirred by the old man's words. That night, Hamza opened his Qur'an and began to read with new eyes. As he recited the story of Prophet Musa and the Israelites, he realized that their struggles and doubts mirrored those of modern life. The people had seen miracles, yet still wavered in faith. He saw in them the reflection of his own moments of weakness, his times of questioning and fear. But then he read of Musa's steadfastness, his prayers, and his submission to Allah's will, and it reminded him of the path he had chosen to walk. Every verse seemed to connect to his own journey in ways he had never noticed before. Days turned into weeks, and Hamza's gatherings grew larger. People from different walks of life came seeking peace and understanding. There were those battling depression, those haunted by dark thoughts, and those struggling to find meaning in life. Through the recitation and explanation of Surah Al-Baqarah, Hamza saw their hearts soften and their lives begin to change. One woman who had not slept peacefully for months due to fear and nightmares came to him after attending several sessions. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Since I started reciting this surah every night, my heart feels calm. The nightmares have stopped. It feels like my home is filled with light." Hamza smiled, knowing that this was the truth of Allah's promise. He felt grateful to be a part of something that was healing hearts. One day, while returning from the mosque, Hamza noticed a small group gathered outside his home. A neighbor told him that a young boy from the street had fallen sick and his family could not afford treatment. Without hesitation, Hamza went to meet them. The boy's mother looked exhausted and desperate. She said her son had been weak for days and the doctors could not find the cause. Hamza's heart ached for them. He asked if he could recite Qur'an for the boy. The mother agreed, tears welling in her eyes. Hamza sat beside the boy and began to recite Surah Al-Baqarah softly. His voice filled the room with warmth and peace. As he read, he noticed the boy's breathing becoming steadier. The atmosphere in the small house began to change, as if a gentle presence had entered. By the time Hamza reached the final verses, the boy had fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep. The mother looked at her son in disbelief, whispering, "He hasn't slept this calmly in days." Hamza smiled and said gently, "It is Allah who heals." These are not my words, but his words, filled with mercy. That night, as Hamza walked home, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The power of the surah was revealing itself more clearly with each passing day. It was not only a chapter of recitation, but a living force, a light that guided hearts, protected homes, and healed souls. Yet deep inside, he felt that there was still something more to uncover, something greater that he had yet to understand. One evening, as Hamza was reciting alone, he reached the verse, "Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear." He stopped and pondered. The words sank deep into his heart. He realized that every hardship he had endured, his job loss, his grandmother's passing, his father's death, had all been within his capacity to bear. Allah had tested him not to break him, but to strengthen him. He smiled, his eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "Indeed, you know what I can bear, and you guide me through every storm." Soon after, Hamza had a dream that felt unlike any other. In it, he was standing inside a vast mosque made of light. The floor shone like water, and verses from Surah Al-Baqarah floated in the air like glowing ribbons. Her voice, gentle yet powerful, said, "The hidden power lies not in the sound of the verses, but in living by them. Whoever lives by this surah will be protected by the unseen." When he woke up, his heart was racing. He knew the dream was not random. It was a sign, a message for him to act upon. He began to reflect deeply on how to live by the surah. He realized that it taught obedience, patience, justice, mercy, and gratitude. He decided to make these principles the foundation of his daily life. Whenever someone wronged him, he chose forgiveness. Whenever he felt fear, he turned to prayer. Whenever he was blessed, he gave thanks and shared with others. Gradually, his life became a reflection of the surah itself. One afternoon, Yusuf came to visit him. He looked at Hamza and said, "Brother, there is something different about you. You carry a calmness that feels like light." Hamza smiled and replied, "It is not my light, Yusuf. It is the light of Allah's words. The more I live by them, the more I see the world with clarity." Yusuf nodded and said, "Then you must share this wisdom beyond our city. Many hearts in the world are lost and in need of this reminder." The idea stayed in Hamza's heart. He began to write about his experiences and the lessons he had learned from Surah Al-Baqarah. His words spread through social media and reached people from different countries. Messages began to pour in from strangers who said his reflections had helped them find peace. Some said their homes felt brighter after reciting the surah regularly. Others said their children no longer had nightmares. Hamza was moved to tears each time. He realized that this was the true hidden power of Surah Al-Baqarah, its ability to transform hearts and lives wherever its light reached. Yet, as his influence grew, so did the challenges. There were those who mocked him, accusing him of exaggeration or seeking fame. Some even spread false rumors about him. For a moment, Hamza felt the weight of their words. But then he remembered the verse, "And be patient, for indeed Allah is with the patient." He smiled and said to himself, "This too is a test." Instead of responding with anger, he continued his mission with sincerity, knowing that Allah was enough as his protector. As months passed, Hamza's gatherings turned into larger events, where people came not only to recite, but to learn how to live by the Qur'an. The mosque overflowed with believers seeking light. Hamza watched them and thought of his grandmother, his father, and the old man Kareem. Their lessons, their prayers, and their faith had all led to this moment. The once restless young man had now become a guide for others, all through the hidden power of a surah he had once known only by name. But Hamza's journey was not yet complete. One final test awaited him, one that would challenge not just his patience, but his very understanding of faith. The next chapter of his life would reveal the deepest secret of Surah Al-Baqarah, the power that not only protects lives, but can change the destiny of the soul itself. The light of the heart. Night sky over Lahore was unusually quiet. Stars shimmered faintly above the rooftops, and the cool breeze carried with it a sense of calm. Hamza sat near his window, the Qur'an open before him, its pages softly rustling as though alive with energy. He had come far since the day his grandmother first told him about the power of Surah Al-Baqarah. The chapter had guided him through loss, hardship, and confusion, transforming his life and the lives of many others. But deep in his heart, he felt that his journey was not yet complete. He sensed that Allah was preparing him for one final test, one that would reveal the true meaning of faith. The following morning, Hamza received a call from Yusuf. His voice was trembling with worry. He said that a nearby village had been struck by a terrible flood. Houses were destroyed, families were displaced, and people were in desperate need of help. Without hesitation, Hamza gathered a small group of volunteers and set out to assist. They packed food, clothes, blankets, and medicines, loading them into a small truck. As they drove toward the flooded area, Hamza silently recited verses from Surah Al-Baqarah, praying for strength and protection. When they arrived, the sight broke his heart. The village was half underwater. Families huddled on rooftops, children cried for food, and the elderly sat in silence, too weak to move. Hamza and his team began distributing supplies, helping the injured, and comforting those who had lost everything. He worked tirelessly from morning until night, his clothes soaked, his hands trembling, but his heart steady with faith. Whenever fear tried to creep in, he remembered the verse, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease," and found renewed courage. One evening, as the team prepared to rest, a young boy approached Hamza. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with mud, and his eyes filled with sorrow. He said softly, "Uncle, my little sister is sick. Can you help her?" Hamza followed the boy to a small hut where he found a girl lying on the ground, burning with fever. The mother sat beside her, weeping silently. The floodwaters had made it impossible to reach a doctor. Hamza knelt down and placed his hand on the child's forehead. He began to recite Surah Al-Baqarah slowly, each verse flowing from his heart with sincerity. The mother joined him in silent prayer. As he recited, a calm filled the room. The girl's breathing eased, and the tension in her tiny body began to fade. By the time Hamza reached the final verses, her fever had lessened, and she had fallen into a peaceful sleep. The mother looked at him with tears of gratitude and whispered, "These are truly words of mercy." Hamza smiled and replied softly, "It is Allah who heals. The Qur'an is his light, and where his light enters, darkness cannot remain." That night, Hamza stepped outside the hut and looked at the flooded village under the moonlight. He realized that even in the midst of destruction, there was hope. Even when everything seemed lost, the Qur'an brought light. It was then that he understood the deeper secret of Surah Al-Baqarah. Its power did not lie in miracles or unseen forces alone, but in the way it transformed hearts, awakening in them faith so strong that no storm could destroy it. As the days passed, the floodwaters began to recede, and life slowly returned to the village. Hamza and his team continued to help rebuild homes and provide support. The villagers often gathered around him at night to listen as he recited Surah Al-Baqarah. They said that since he began reciting, the fear and hopelessness that had gripped the village had started to fade. The children slept peacefully, and even the animals seemed calmer. Hamza knew this was the mercy of Allah, who had made his words a source of healing and protection for all creation. After 2 weeks, Hamza returned to Lahore, his heart full of reflection. The experiences of the past days had changed him deeply. He felt closer to Allah than ever before. Every verse of the surah now carried new meaning for him. It was as if each line revealed a different shade of wisdom, depending on the state of his heart. One night, he sat in his prayer room, the same one where he had first recited the surah years ago. He closed his eyes and remembered his grandmother's voice, his father's smile, and the old man Karim's words about hidden wisdom. Their teachings, their patience, and their faith had all led him to this point. Suddenly, a wave of emotion overcame him. He raised his hands in dua and said, "Ya Allah, I have seen your mercy in every trial. You tested me with loss and gave me patience. You tested me with pain and gave me peace. You showed me that your words are alive, and that every verse is a light for those who seek you. Let me spend the rest of my life spreading this light to others." As he finished his prayer, a calmness, unlike any he had ever felt before, settled over him. It was as though his heart had found complete surrender. In the days that followed, Hamza began working on a book titled The Hidden Power of Surah Al-Baqarah. It contained his journey, the stories he had witnessed, and the lessons he had learned from the surah. He wrote about how the chapter protects homes from evil, brings healing to hearts, and strengthens faith in times of despair. He included real accounts from the people he had met, stories of transformation, hope, and peace. His words were simple yet powerful because they came from experience, not imagination. When the book was finally published, it spread far beyond his expectations. People from around the world reached out to him, sharing how it had changed their lives. Some said their families had reconciled after years of conflict. Others said their homes had become places of peace. Many wrote that their faith had been renewed. Hamza wept with gratitude, realizing that this was not his doing but the work of Allah through his divine words. One night, as Hamza sat alone reflecting, a cool breeze entered his room, carrying with it a familiar scent of jasmine. He smiled, remembering his grandmother. It felt as though her spirit was near, watching with pride. He opened the Qur'an once more and began to recite Surah Al-Baqarah, his voice steady and filled with love. As he read, he felt the verses flowing through him like light. When he reached the final ayah, he closed the Qur'an and whispered, "O Allah, I have lived by these words, and they have carried me through every storm. Let me die with them upon my lips." Years passed, and Hamza grew old. His hair turned white, but his eyes still shone with the same faith that had guided him through life. The mosque where he once taught had grown into a large center of learning. Children, adults, and scholars gathered there to study the Qur'an. Every evening, the sound of Surah Al-Baqarah echoed through its walls. Hamza would sit in the front row, smiling as the new generation carried on the light. He knew that his time was near, but he felt no fear. His heart was content. One evening, after Maghrib prayer, Hamza recited the surah one last time. When he finished, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered the words, "To Allah we belong, and to Him we return." A gentle smile remained on his face as his soul returned to its Creator in peace. The people who found him said that the room was filled with a fragrance sweeter than any they had known, and the Qur'an beside him was open to the final verse of Surah Al-Baqarah. In the days that followed, people from near and far came to pay their respects. They spoke of how Hamza had changed their lives, how his faith had inspired them, and how his teachings had brought peace to countless hearts. His name became a symbol of faith, and his story continued to spread long after his passing. Generations later, people still recited Surah Al-Baqarah in their homes, remembering the man who had shown them its hidden power. The light he had carried in his heart had spread like dawn across the world, reminding all who listened that within the words of Allah lies a strength that no darkness can overcome. And so, the legacy of Hamza lived on, not through fame or wealth, but through the timeless power of the Qur'an, whose light continues to guide every soul that seeks it.